Didier Deschamps is out. After 14 years in charge of France, the World Cup defeat to Spain brought one of international football's greatest managerial runs to an end. But that loss was only part of the story. Let me catch you up because there is a lot more drama behind the scenes. Spain's win over France didn't just end a World Cup run. It ended an era. Spain advanced to the 2026 World Cup final after defeating France 2-0 in the semi-finals, ending the French bid for another title and setting up the final match of manager Didier Deschamps' tenure. Goals from Mikel Oyarzabal and Pedro Porro did the damage. And just like that, the dream of a third star on the French shirt was gone. Spain secured their victory over France through goals by Mikel Oyarzabal and Pedro Porro, with Les Blues unable to unlock a resolute Spanish side despite boasting one of the most talented rosters in recent international football history. Here's the thing, Deschamps knew this exact scenario was coming, win or lose. Prior to the 2026 World Cup, Didier Deschamps confirmed he would step down as head coach of France regardless of the team's tournament finish, though he still had the opportunity to guide his side to a bronze medal in the third-place match. So the semi-final defeat didn't just cost France a shot at the final, it confirmed that his exit was now just days away. With one final match left to play, Deschamps will now take charge of France one final time in the third-place playoff on Saturday, where his side will face the loser of the England versus Argentina semi-final. Reaction came fast. French Football Federation President Philippe Diallo had already been dropping hints for months about what comes next, telling French newspaper Le Figaro that he knew exactly who would take over. He just wasn't ready to say the name out loud. This succession follows comments from FFF President Philippe Diallo, who told French newspaper Le Figaro that he already knew who Deschamps' successor would be, though he declined to name Zidane publicly at the time. Everyone in French football circles already knew who he meant. Zinedine Zidane, the man who lifted the World Cup alongside Deschamps as a player back in 1998. The man who won 3 straight Champions League titles at Real Madrid is the one lined up to take over. Zinedine Zidane, the former Real Madrid manager, winner of 3 Champions Leagues in a row and a former Deschamps teammate with the France team, is the heavy favorite to replace him. And this isn't some rumor floating around a French sports radio show. ESPN reported in March that former France star Zinedine Zidane will be the national team's next manager after reaching a verbal agreement. Kylian Mbappé, France's captain, had already spoken about what this World Cup meant with Deschamps walking out the door. Before a ball was even kicked in the tournament, Mbappé told M6 that the best way the squad could honor their coach was to win it all for him, because Deschamps loves winning and the team wanted to give him the best possible send-off. That's a captain publicly rallying his locker room around a departing boss. The kind of statement that only gets made when everyone in the building knows the end is genuinely near. It didn't happen. Spain saw to that. And now the story shifts from can they win it for him to how does this all wrap up? France will now move on to the third-place match on Saturday against either England or Argentina, which will serve as Deschamps' final match in charge of the French national team. Zidane's path into this job wasn't built overnight either. He didn't just get a phone call out of nowhere. Zidane has long been considered the likely successor to Deschamps. After spending part of his international career playing alongside Deschamps and winning the 1998 World Cup together, the two of them share a World Cup winner's medal from the same tournament, on the same pitch under the same manager Aimé Jacquet. That connection is part of why this handover feels less like a changing of the guard, and more like a passing of the torch between old teammates. By March of 2026, the deal was basically locked. Reports surfaced that Zinedine Zidane, the former Real Madrid manager, had reached a verbal agreement with the French Football Federation to take over once the tournament concludes. France still had to actually play the World Cup, obviously. Nobody was walking away from that, but the transition was always designed to happen after the tournament, not during it. So here's where things stand right now. Deschamps has one match left. A third-place playoff against whichever team loses the England-Argentina semi-final. It's not the final everyone in France was hoping for back when the tournament kicked off. It's a bronze medal game, a consolation prize. The kind of match that usually gets treated as a formality nobody really cares about. Except this one is different, because it's the last time Didier Deschamps will ever stand on the touchline as manager of the French national team. This match will serve as Deschamps' final match in charge of the French national team. Whatever happens on that field, whatever the scoreline ends up being, it's the closing image of a story that started 14 years ago. Despite the disappointment of the 2-0 defeat, Deschamps leaves behind a remarkable legacy built on consistency, tactical discipline, and sustained success across major tournaments. But legacies don't get written in a single tournament. To understand how we got to this exit, to this final match, to Zidane waiting in the wings, you've got to go back to where this whole era started. A phone call in the summer of 2012, and a manager nobody was totally sure could handle the job. To understand why this ending carries so much weight, you need to understand what came before it. Deschamps didn't inherit a golden generation ready-made for greatness. He inherited a mess. Deschamps took over from Laurent Blanc 14 years ago in summer 2012 and brought unprecedented success to the national team. French football at that point was still recovering from the disaster of the 2010 World Cup, where the team imploded from the inside, player strikes, dressing room chaos, a group stage exit that embarrassed the entire country. Deschamps walked into that wreckage and rebuilt it, brick by brick, over more than a decade. The results speak for themselves in a way few managers in the history of the sport can claim. As well as winning the 2018 World Cup and the 2021 Nations League, he reached the final of the 2016 European Championship and 2022 World Cup and the 2024 European Championship semi-final. 4 major tournaments, 4 times reaching at least the semi-final stage. That's not luck, that's a system. Numbers tell the rest of the story. He is by far the most successful France head coach ever, with a 64.2% win percentage and reaching at least the semifinals in the last 4 big tournaments. Across his full body of work in charge, the results were staggering. Deschamps finishes 120-29 with 35 draws across 183 matches as France's manager. That's a coach who lost fewer than 1 in 6 games he ever managed for his country. In an era where international management is famously unforgiving, where coaches get fired after a single bad tournament, Deschamps built something that lasted. And then there's the World Cup specifically, the tournament that defines legacies in this sport more than any other. Deschamps didn't just do well there, he rewrote the record books. After a 2-0 victory over Morocco in the 2026 World Cup quarterfinals, he earned his 20th World Cup win for France, making him the first manager to oversee 20 wins at the World Cup. And this was his 25th World Cup match in charge overall, equaling Helmut Schön's record. No manager in the history of the tournament has won more games than Deschamps. Nobody. Not Vincent Del Bosque, not Joachim Leroux. Not anybody who's ever stood in a World Cup dugout. Even the way he got there was historic. At the 2026 World Cup, he became only the 3rd manager to coach the same national team at 4 consecutive tournaments. After Walter Winterbottom and Helmut Schön. 4 World Cups, same country, same job, uninterrupted. Spanning more than a decade of shifting player generations, changing tactical trends, and constant pressure from a football-obsessed public that doesn't forgive easily. There's also the rarer distinction, the one that puts him in a club of essentially 3 people ever. Along with Mario Zagallo and Franz Beckenbauer, he is one of only 3 men to win the World Cup both as a player and as a manager. He lifted it as captain in 1998. He lifted it again as manager in 2018. Nobody else currently working in football can say that. His playing career before any of the management stuff is worth pausing on too, because it explains a lot about how he coaches. Didier Claude Deschamps, popularly known as Dede, is a French professional football manager and former player who played as a defensive midfielder for several clubs. In France, Italy, England, and Spain, namely Marseille, Juventus, Chelsea, and Valencia, as well as Nantes and Bordeaux. He wasn't the flashiest player on the pitch. He was famously nicknamed something that stuck with him for the rest of his career. Nicknamed the Water Carrier, Deschamps was an intelligent and hardworking defensive midfielder who excelled at winning back possession and subsequently starting attacking plays, and also stood out for his leadership throughout his career. That leadership showed up on the international stage in a big way. As a French international, he was capped on 103 occasions and took part at 3 UEFA European Championships and 1 FIFA World Cup, captaining his nation to victories in the 1998 World Cup and Euro 2000. He was already a winner before he ever picked up a whistle. His management career didn't start with France either. He earned his stripes first at club level, and it's where a lot of football people first noticed he had something. Deschamps first made a name for himself with Monaco as one of the best tacticians in Europe. During the team's 2003-4 Champions League run with his counter-attacking style. That run is still talked about by fans who watched a smaller club take one of Europe's giants all the way to a Champions League final. Once he got the France job, the contract renewals kept coming, each one a vote of confidence from the federation. Didier Deschamps signed a new deal to stay as coach until 2020. According to BBC Sport reporting from October 2017. Then came another extension. In December 2019, Deschamps signed a new contract with France, keeping him with the national team until World Cup 2022. Not every chapter was a triumph, though, and that's part of what makes the story real instead of just a highlight reel. At the Euro 2020, France were knocked out on penalties by Switzerland in the round of 16. Following a 3-3 draw, and Deschamps was criticized for getting his team selections and tactics wrong. It was one of the biggest shocks of his tenure. The reigning World Cup champions bounced out by a team nobody gave much of a chance. He answered it. In the 2022 World Cup, he led France to reach their second final in a row, which they lost 4-2 on penalties to Argentina after a 3-3 draw. That Qatar final is still considered one of the great World Cup finals ever played. A Lionel Messi masterpiece against a French side that came roaring back from 3 goals down. France lost, but the manager who built that team walked away with his reputation enhanced rather than damaged. In January 2023, he extended his contract with France until June 2026. That extension is the one that mattered most, because it set the clock running on exactly when this story would end. Everybody in French football knew from that point forward that Deschamps had one more World Cup cycle left in him before the federation would need a new man in charge. What nobody knew yet was that Deschamps himself would be the one to make that call and make it public well before the tournament even arrived. Long before Spain ended anything on the pitch, Deschamps had already ended it himself on his own terms in front of cameras. In January 2025, Deschamps announced that he would not extend his contract when it expires after the 2026 FIFA World Cup. That's the moment this entire story really begins. Not with a bad result, not with fans turning on him, not with the federation pushing him out. He simply decided it was time, and he said so out loud. More than a year before the tournament, he'd be walking away from even kicked off. He laid it out plainly to French broadcaster TF1, and the words carried the weight of a man who'd clearly thought about this for a long time. Deschamps said that in 2026 it would be over, that in his head it was very clear, that he'd done his time with the same desire and passion to keep France at the highest level, but that 2026 was the right time to stop. He added that a person has to be able to say stop, that there's a life after this, and that the most important thing was for France to stay at the top the way it had for years. That's not the language of a man being forced out. That's the language of someone closing a chapter deliberately. The federation's response made the situation even clearer. Rather than fight to keep him or scramble to find a replacement in secret, everyone treated the announcement as final from day one. Prior to the start of the World Cup, Deschamps announced his plans to step down as France's manager afterward. No walking it back. No last-minute contract renegotiation rumors. Just a clean, public countdown to the exit. One of the people most affected by that announcement wasn't a federation official or a player. It was Aimé Jacquet, the man who coached Deschamps as captain back in 1998. The man who first put the armband on his arm. Jacquet gave an interview to French radio station France Inter before the 2026 tournament began. And it captured something about what this departure actually means beyond the trophies and the stat sheets. Jacquet told the station, "The French national team is part of your identity." That's the kind of line that only makes sense once you understand the full arc. Deschamps wasn't just an employee of the French Football Federation for 14 years. He was, in a very real sense, French football itself. Captain in 1998, manager from 2012 onward. Present at every major moment the national team experienced for close to 3 decades. Jacquet's comment wasn't sentiment for the sake of a headline. It was an old mentor recognizing that his former captain's entire adult life had been wrapped up in that shirt, in that badge, in that team. FIFA's own coverage of the tournament picked up on the same theme. France may advance deep into the tournament, but Didier Deschamps had written the end of the story himself, announcing in January that he would be stepping down at the end of the FIFA World Cup 2026. And he knew every match could now be his last. Known for his tenacity, he was set to give it his all. Every match he coached from January 2025 onward carried that shadow. Every substitution, every tactical tweak, every press conference came with the same subtext: this might be it. That subtext followed the team even deep into the tournament itself. Once France had beat Morocco to reach the semifinals, The writing about Deschamps' legacy kept circling back to the same idea, that even if the story ended right there, it wouldn't diminish what he'd built. Even if France's journey were to end against Morocco, it would do little to diminish Deschamps' legacy. And beyond the trophies and records, perhaps his greatest achievement is that he has permanently established France among the best teams in FIFA World Cup history. That context matters for understanding just how big a shift this is for French football overall. Before Deschamps' era began, France simply weren't one of the great World Cup nations in terms of raw results. Before Deschamps started his World Cup career, France had played 34 World Cup matches across 9 tournament appearances, recording only 15 victories, and they had reached the semi-finals 3 times but had never reached the final, settling instead for 2 third-place finishes, in 1958 and 1986. Compare that to where the team sits now. The Deschamps generation changed the face of French football, turning France, a perennial outsider, into one of international football's most formidable teams. 20 World Cup wins under his management alone, more than the entire history of the national team managed to produce before he ever took the job. That's the scale of the shift. So when the January 2025 announcement landed, it wasn't just news about one man's employment status. It was the confirmation that the most successful period in the history of French football had an expiration date attached to it. And everyone, players, fans, federation officials, even Deschamps himself, now had roughly 18 months to prepare for what came after. What nobody could have predicted was just how much drama and how much personal loss would unfold before that expiration date actually arrived. The 2026 World Cup was never going to be a normal send-off. It became something far heavier than anyone expected. And it happened while the cameras were rolling and the results were still coming in. France opened the tournament well, and Deschamps kept adding to his record books as the group stage went on. In France's second group stage victory over Iraq, he equaled the tally of Helmut Schön with 16 World Cup matches won. 16 wins put him level with one of the legendary names in World Cup managerial history, and the team was rolling. Then came the moment that changed the tone of the entire tournament for France. He had to miss the third group stage match against Norway after returning home due to the death of his mother. A World Cup campaign in the middle of group play, interrupted by personal tragedy. The federation's public response to that moment carried real weight, expressing that at such a painful time, they wished the head coach great strength and assured him of everyone's support. With Deschamps gone, someone had to step into the breach, and it fell to a man who'd been by his side for years without ever getting the spotlight. Longtime assistant coach Guy Steffen took temporary charge and headed up France's management team for the meeting with Norway. Steffen wasn't some outsider brought in during a crisis. He was the coach who'd sat next to Deschamps through nearly the entire 14-year run, the guy who knew the system inside and out. He held the fort. He handed the reins back to Deschamps for the round of 32 and beyond. Deschamps came back to finish the job, grief and all, and the tournament kept producing milestones for him even through that difficult stretch. The quarterfinal against Morocco turned into one of the defining games of his farewell tour. After a 2-0 victory over Morocco in the 2026 World Cup quarterfinals, he earned his 20th World Cup win for France, making him the first manager to oversee 20 wins at the World Cup, with this being his 25th World Cup match in charge overall, equaling Helmut Schön's record. That win over Morocco did more than pad a personal record. It pushed France into rare territory as a nation, closing in on the sport's all-time greats in terms of total World Cup victories. A victory over Morocco and qualification for the semi-finals would mean France would equal Italy's total of 45 World Cup wins, when before the Deschamps era, the Azzurri were comfortably ahead of France in that category, with 35 wins to 19. Think about that gap for a second. A 16-win deficit to Italy before Deschamps ever took over, completely erased under his management. That quarterfinal also carried extra motivation from the dressing room itself, motivation that had been building since before the tournament even started. Mbappé had already made the point publicly, months earlier, about what this run meant for the man on the sideline. He told M6 that the best way to pay tribute to Deschamps was to win the tournament, because Deschamps loves winning, and that the squad was going to do everything possible to make sure he had the best possible World Cup. That's a captain speaking for an entire generation of players, who came up under one manager and never knew international football under anybody else. Half the France squad by 2026 had only ever known Didier Deschamps as their national team boss. Some of them were teenagers when he took the job in 2012. The idea of playing for someone else, of a France dugout without him in it, simply hadn't existed in their careers until this tournament forced them to face it. The semifinal against Spain is where the story reached its breaking point. Spain had been building momentum of their own throughout the tournament, and they delivered the performance that mattered most right when it counted. France entered the World Cup semifinals as the favorite to lift the trophy, but hopes of a second title in 3 tournaments were dashed by Spain. The scoreline reflected a French attack that simply couldn't break down a well-organized opponent. Despite boasting one of the most talented rosters in recent international football history, Les Bleus were unable to unlock a resolute Spanish side. 2-0, no response, no last-minute magic. The kind of result that ends tournaments and, in this specific case, ends careers as well. Across the whole tournament, Deschamps had piled up records, absorbed the loss of his mother mid-competition, handed his team over to a trusted lieutenant for a single match, taken it back, pushed his squad to the brink of the final, and then watched it all end 2 goals short. If you wrote it as fiction, an editor would tell you to tone it down. It happened in real time in front of the entire football world over the space of about 5 weeks. And now, with the group stage, the family tragedy, the Morocco quarterfinal, and the Spain heartbreak all behind him, there's exactly 1 match left. A third-place playoff against the loser of England versus Argentina. The final few minutes of a 14-year story. That started with a phone call from the Federation back in 2012, and is ending in the summer heat of a shared World Cup hosted across North America. So where does this actually leave French football? 1 match remains for Deschamps, and 1 name has been circling for months to take over once he walks away for good. Manager Didier Deschamps isn't returning after this World Cup, ending a 14-year tenure that saw France reach 3 consecutive World Cup semifinals. That's the headline stat that sums up the consistency of the whole era. 3 straight semifinals or better, at a level almost no other national team manager in the modern game has sustained. Zinedine Zidane's path to this job runs through some of the biggest jobs in club football, and it's worth understanding exactly what he's bringing with him. Zidane became the manager of Real Madrid Castilla, Real Madrid's B team, in 2014, before taking over Real Madrid in the early days of 2016. What he did once he got the top job at Real Madrid turned him into one of the most decorated coaches of his generation almost overnight. Real Madrid won La Liga in 2017 and captured 3 consecutive Champions League titles under Zidane, but he resigned days after the 2018 Champions League final. He didn't stay away for long. His time away didn't last long, as Real Madrid rehired Zidane early in 2019 for another stint that lasted more than 2 years, and Real Madrid won another La Liga title under him before he left the club in May of 2021. Across both stints combined, his trophy haul at club level puts him firmly among the greatest managers to ever coach in Europe. Zizou amassed 11 trophies during his managerial stints at Real Madrid, including 3 consecutive UEFA Champions League titles. But taking the France job is a different animal entirely from club management. And that's not a small detail. While managing Real Madrid comes with immense pressure, taking charge of the national team would represent a unique hurdle for Zinedine Zidane, who recently was eclipsed by Jude Bellingham in World Cup goals. National team football moves at a different pace. Fewer matches, longer gaps between camps, far less day-to-day control over the players compared to club level. It's a completely different job, even for someone who won almost everything available to him in the club game. The expectations waiting for him are enormous, and they come with a roster that's already stacked with talent across Europe's biggest leagues. Expectations surrounding the French squad are sky-high, given a star-studded roster featuring key players competing across Europe's top leagues. He's not walking into a rebuilding project. He's walking into a machine that Deschamps spent 14 years constructing, and the pressure to keep it running at the same level starts on day 1. His first assignments are already mapped out for him. With France, his primary objectives would be guiding the nation through UEFA Euro 2028 and launching a title charge at the 2030 FIFA World Cup. 2 major tournaments back-to-back, with a fan base that's grown used to nothing less than semifinals and finals under the previous regime. There's also a family thread running through this handover that adds another layer to the story. Zidane wasn't just watching this World Cup as a pundit or a future employee of the Federation. He had personal skin in the tournament itself. Zinedine Zidane, who saw his son Luka playing in the 2026 World Cup, is the prime candidate to succeed Didier Deschamps. Picture that for a second. The man about to take over the national team, sitting in the stands, watching his own son compete on the same World Cup stage, while simultaneously being lined up to inherit the dugout. The connection between the 2 men goes back decades, to a shared dressing room and a shared trophy. Zidane has long been considered the likely successor to Deschamps, after spending part of his international career playing alongside Deschamps and winning the 1998 World Cup together. That's not a stranger walking into a new job. That's a teammate picking up where his old captain left off, more than a quarter century after they lifted the same trophy together on the same pitch in Paris. As for what actually happens on the pitch this weekend, that third-place match still means something, even as a formality. It's Deschamps' actual final act in the job. France will move on to the third-place match on Saturday against either England or Argentina, which will serve as Deschamps' final match in charge of the French national team. Whatever the result, whatever the scoreline, it closes the book on a tenure that transformed how the world views French football. Zoom out on the whole picture, and the scale of what's ending here becomes clear. While he is only 57, Deschamps lasted longer than most European national team managers, spending 14 years as the French manager, and reaching the World Cup semifinals 3 times with 1 title. 14 years, 1 World Cup trophy as manager, 1 more as captain, 2 additional finals, a Nations League title, and a win percentage that no other coach in the history of the French national team has come close to matching. He leaves at the moment of his own choosing, with the federation lined up behind a successor he once shared a locker room with, and a squad that Mbappé publicly rallied around him, even as the run came up just short against Spain. The scoreboard in that semifinal read 2-0 to Spain, and that result put a bronze medal match between Deschamps and the exit door, instead of a golden trophy lift. But 14 years, 4 World Cups, and a national team transformed from perennial outsider into one of the sport's dominant forces. That part of the story was already written long before Spain ever took the pitch. The next chapter belongs to Zidane now, and the whole footballing world is about to find out what he does with it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content. Sources: Didier Deschamps, Wikipedia. Didier Deschamps to step down from France after 26 WC cycle, ESPN. Didier Deschamps ends tenure as France head coach. Zidane set to succeed him. What's next for France once Didier Deschamps steps down? Fox Sports. Is Didier Deschamps leaving France after the 2026 World Cup? Bolivip US. Why is Didier Deschamps not managing France tonight? For what to know about Zinedine Zidane replacing Didier Deschamps as France's manager following 2026 World Cup. Yahoo Sports. Didier Deschamps to step down as France head coach after FIFA World Cup 2026. Sunday Guardian Live. 1064. Didier Deschamps leaving his mark on Les Bleus FIFA.